I want to tell you about a client I had this morning.
Yes.
And
Okay.
so, when I first started my business, it was state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized I was helping people out of their temporary suffering, but I wasn't helping them to change so they'd come back around when life had happened.
Mm-hmm.
So this client this morning, I saw her in about 2014, I guess, and then she got in touch earlier this year and said she wanted to come and see me again. And it's explained to her that, all right, I'm doing things differently now. I'm more educational. I'm doing a program. So she did a program, and now she's in a monthly maintenance program.
Mm-hmm.
And she came in today with this amazing story, and I think it perfectly sums up why I changed my business model. And she was talking about how still she's being. The sultan of stillness has sort of washed over her. And she didn't realise what she was saying. And what she was saying was, I'm just driving along listening to my music, and I'm just really enjoying listening to the music, or I'm really enjoying driving, or I'm really enjoying vacuuming, even, she said. And I went, it sounds like you're just enjoying being present.
Yeah.
And she goes, oh my God. Oh yeah. And I said, it sounds like you are a lot more settled. And I said, what you're experiencing is equanimity. You're experiencing an equanimous mind. You're just observing. You're sitting in awareness. And there's no judging. There's no good or bad, right or wrong. It's not this song's stupid or that tree's weird or the weather's terrible. There's no narrative. You're not in that stream of thought. You were just sitting in observation, in awareness, in stillness. And she's going, it feels so nice. And I'm like, it's great. But it was amazing listening to this person talk about it who'd never really experienced it.
Yep.
And it genuinely filled my heart and soul just hearing her describe it. But more importantly, to learn that she had developed a capacity to create that for herself now. And she spoke about she didn't like conflict, and she went into work last week and she said to her boss, I'm changing departments. And she was discussing the story, and she said, so I emailed my boss and said I needed to chat. And so the next day we caught up before work, and it was all nice and it was all surface level lovely. And then she said I dropped my bomb, and she said it was so weird because she just turned and she went so negative, and she attacked me, verbally attacked me, and in the blink of an eye. And I said, so what happened was you observed her mind going to these distortions because she wasn't getting what she wanted, and you saw her enter suffering, and then you felt her projecting her suffering onto you. And she goes, and I could just see it, and I just sat there, and all I remember is going, this is so interesting. And she didn't take it personally, and I said, you doing your job made your manager happy. So now that you're not going to there, you're making her unhappy in her mind. Yes. You're the source of her happiness. As soon as you disappear, she's codependent on you. You're suddenly the source of her unhappiness. So that's why she's attacking you. And she goes, but just sitting there watching it unfold, she goes, it was so interesting.
Yeah, it's so funny. It leads on we're talking about the 4 agreements today, and one of them is don't take things personally, and that's
totally. That's why I wanted to share the story.
The perfect example of just watching what's going on, and it's funny that stillness that she's talking about and that being present, it can be so foreign for people, and it's like you tell them, you're being present, you're not anywhere else. Whatever you're doing, you're just doing it, and they're like, oh yeah, it seems like we're in a society where that's so foreign. It's kind of like it needs to be reflected back to us. That's what's going on to understand. Oh wow, that's amazing. I think Thich Nhat Hanh talks about it in The Miracle of Mindfulness, and he's like, you've got this really juicy plum in the fruit bowl, and then you can't wait to eat this plum, and you're sitting there and you have to do the dishes and you're washing the teapot. but all you're thinking about is eating that juicy plum. He goes, you're not washing the teapot.
Yeah.
Right? And this is what people do. It's like she's not sitting in the car enjoying the music. She's not vacuuming and actually enjoying the process of vacuuming. We're always thinking about that other thing that what's
You're always in the
next.
future or in the past, so
Yeah.
she's either in anxiety or ruminating. So it's, she's freed her mind. She's freed herself of all of these attachments and all of these judgments and all of that, which has created this capacity for her just to sit there and observe things and go, how interesting. Oh
And
my
the,
God, look
and
at
the
that.
beauty of that is that becomes like an anchor. And so when she and like everyone, we all things happen in life where it brings us out of that stillness and we start to get, emotionally disturbed. We start to take things personally. But if I have that anchor, I know when I'm getting off that track. Kind of thing. When we don't have
Well, it's
the
coming
anchor,
back into
we don't have the
alignment.
anchor. We're always off the track, and we don't know where to
Yeah.
get back on.
So that's why we do the maintenance program, is to keep people on that path or anchored or aligned with the Dharma, that pathway. But it reminds me of another client I think I've spoken about, and she did all this work and came on one day looking confused, and she said, I think I'm bored. And we had a chat about it, and we came into an understanding that she was actually just at peace. But because she'd been so conditioned to a life of conflict, when there was no more conflict, she didn't know what that was.
Yeah.
And she mistook it for
Mistook it for
boredom for
boredom.
peace.
Yeah,
Or peace for boredom.
Yeah,
So-
you see it. I've had so many clients with parents who were mainly bipolar. Yeah, and that can be in conjunction with alcoholism and drug use. But a parent who was
Sounds like my father.
Yeah, so like the growing up, so bipolar is very chaotic. Yeah, it's this highs, lows, highs, lows.
Manic or
Yeah,
depressive,
yeah. So when we're young, we then start to get used to chaos, and so then we're always prepared for chaos, and chaos kind of becomes our normal. And that's why when we get older, and if we don't do the work, we will start to attract drama into our life just to try and recreate our childhood. So we tend to. So when there's no drama going on, people like that tend to get really uneasy. Right? It's like there's no drama in my life. That's not right, because they're so conditioned and programmed to have drama in childhood.
So I had that childhood, but as you call me, the Sultan of Still, I really love peace. I love calm now.
Yeah.
So do you think it's like, growing up with an alcoholic father, two boys grow up with an alcoholic father, one of them will become a teetotaler, one of them will become an alcoholic, and so you sort of tend to go to one end of the spectrum or the other. Do you think that's the same?
Maybe, but you're someone who has been through, a lot of anxiety and depression, alcohol use and that kind of thing in between then, and then done a shit ton of work on yourself.
You're right.
Yeah.
Forgot about all that work.
Forgot about that. Forgot about having to break down and rebuild myself. It's funny that's actually a good topic, because it's so funny we forget. And I do this because, and once again, we always bang on about beliefs, but do a lot of belief work. It's funny when a core belief changes, we instantly kind of forget that we had the opposite belief or a different belief. And it's like sometimes that's why oftentimes I'll go back, because we have a testing sheet that we go through in most sessions, but in the first session I go through it with a lot of people, and it's good to always reflect back and to say, look, this is where you were in the beliefs and the perception of what your life was like, and they're like, who is that guy or that girl? And I'm like, yeah, you forget really quick, because once the beliefs change, your identity changes, and that old part of you is kind of forgotten.
Well, I think the work I'm doing is just helping me get back to my genuine and authentic state. So it's
Which is what?
Deconditioning everything. It's my spirit animal is a turtle, so it's my nature is being very compassionate, being very empathetic, being very caring. But I was talking to this client this morning, so she's a nurse, and I said, when you're in suffering, you're in no capacity to be there for somebody else. So I couldn't be a great therapist or a good therapist or whatever sort of therapist until I was okay. And I said, my role, my primary role, is when a client comes into the room, is to stay still, to stay grounded, to stay present, because my clients are coming in very heightened, and so when I stay grounded, they're going to start mirroring me. They're going to start. I'm going to start bringing them down, and just through being around my energy, they're going to feel a lot calmer, and then they're going to be able to be more present to listen to all the stuff we're talking about. So that's why online therapy is good, but I feel in person is always much better because there's that energy exchange.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
more
and
intimate.
it can work both ways. You hear it a lot, this whole holding space, and what does that mean? And it's just what container is the client coming into? Like myself and my friend Matt have literally just done a course on this that we're releasing soon on understanding trauma, and one of the modules is mainly for therapists around. It's like if you're haven't done your own trauma work and cleared yourself out, and you'll never clear yourself out fully, because stuff will always come up, but if you
Yeah.
haven't done that work, then it doesn't matter what modality you're using, it's not going to work if you get triggered by so let's say a client comes in and they've got mummy issues, right? There's some big stuff there with their mum they're holding on to, and let's say that I have, and I don't, but luckily, but I did. We've all got issues with mum and dad, but I've worked on that. So, but let's say they suddenly start
Shout out
going
to
in.
Mrs. Hassan. Hi, Mrs. Hassan.
G'day, mum. But we all do to a varying degree. Now, let's say that they come in and they start bringing this stuff up, and I have all this unresolved emotional stuff with my mum, then that gets triggered. And when you said about the energy, all of a sudden now an energetic exchange starts happening
Yeah.
that's not beneficial for the client. It's like if I can't...
There's an unseen shift that
There's
happens
no-
in the room.
Yeah, and it starts reflecting. Yeah, it's like fear. You know, someone goes into fear and feels like they're going to start having a panic attack. And if you can't hold space for a panic state and you start panicking, it's like a table tennis match, and that fear just bounces back and forward and gets worse and worse. Yeah,
It's like a parent with a kid in a supermarket, and I see this so often. I see the mum yelling at the kid, "Stop that! Stop doing it!" The kid's just being an irrational kid, operating off an irrational belief that I must get what I want. What I want is that toy. When I don't get it, I'm going to have a tantrum. Yeah, so that's the reality of what is. But the mum imposes her belief that you shouldn't do that. You should be normal. You should be more calm. You should go at my
yeah.
pace.
We're
Hurry up
struggling.
and
Don't you
walk.
know we're struggling for money? Blah blah
Yeah,
blah.
and we're in a rush. Hurry up and walk at my adult leg pace. Get your little child legs to go at my adult leg pace. And you see them dragging them along, literally. And the kid's in an emotional disturbance. Yeah, the kid's in suffering. And then the parent comes along and goes, "Stop crying," gets heightened themselves, and then they heighten this pours onto this child who's defenseless. It's a sponge, and all of a sudden it's like, "Stop crying." It's just a nightmare.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolute nightmare.
It's the same thing. It's
So-
it's an energetic exchange, just bouncing back and forth because
And
because
so
the
that's why I
adult. So someone needs to hold space, and the child does not have the capacity to hold space. And the funny thing is, the adult probably
No.
doesn't either. In that case.
Exactly. So all these emotionally immature adults are trying to adult. They're trying to have these adult relationships. They're trying to be parents. They're trying to be role models. Yet they're at no capacity to do that either.
Yeah,
And
because
then
we're just grown-up kids.
exactly. So I said to my nurse client this morning, and shout out to her. You know who you are, and once again, super proud of what level you've been able to get to. But I said to her, imagine in ICU, people have been through a severe physical trauma that's going to come with an unforeseen emotional trauma. And I said, imagine the state this person's in on an emotional level. They're in deep anxiety or deep suffering or something. And you come along and you're very aware and present and still and just at peace. You're going to be like a safe haven for them. Like your energy is just going to wash around them. And yeah, you may be able to bandage their leg, or you may be able to stitch their arm or whatever, but your energy is going to start healing start the healing process as well.
Yeah.
And she sat there and she's like, God, you're right. That's so true.
It's so true. Tell her to read some Peter Levine, because it's so prevalent. It's called, so it's like the fear cycle, and so a fear cycle has to complete. And we've spoken about before how, like in animals, that fear cycle can complete and come back to a regulated state, whereas us humans aren't so good at that. And so and people going through a trauma of like car crash, whatever's happened to someone to come into a hospital. So they've gone through a trauma, and so there is a fear response there. Then there's a circle that's started, and a compassionate presence from another human being is one of the keys for us humans to help complete that cycle. And it's also, Peter Levine talks about, in conjunction with also discharging the energy from the body, but you need that compassionate presence. You know?
Go back to the mum in the supermarket. This child is in suffering, and the mum comes along and says, stop crying. The mum's trying to stop the cycle from completing, instead of being compassionate and empathetic and understanding and kind and considerate and blah blah blah, and facilitating that process. They're going, stop your emotions.
Yeah, and then the kid
shut your emotions down.
Shut them down, and that's
suppress that shit.
Suppress it. Because it's easier for me as a parent if you suppress it and become a robot, and I'm going to assume that that's not going to run into any issues later on when you become a teenager or older.
Adulthood is just undoing everything that happens to us in childhood, isn't it?
Yeah. It's coming full circle. It's like now we've got the capacity, and we've learned how to live in a society and have these social norms. But then we still have all the childhood programming just to undo.
So you let the cat out of the bag earlier, but today's podcast is all about the 4 agreements. Before we get into the 4 agreements, what the fuck does let the cat out of the bag mean?
I thought we were going to do beating around the bush.
Oh, we are beating around the bush. Oh, well, let's not beat around the bush.
Yeah, well, let's let the cat... So, do you want to take over the beat around the bush one?
I don't even know where to start.
Because I'm normally, I've got some story going on, but that's a weird one. So let's think about...
I'm picturing instantly. My mind goes to in the outback Australia, Indigenous tribes, and so beating around the bush means, what does it mean? Don't
when you say don't beat around the bush, it means get to the point. It's like you're procrastinating.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I'm just picturing an Aboriginal bloke with his spear or his stick just whacking around the bush because he's trying to get a food source out from under the bush. Maybe there's some ants, or maybe there's a snake or something. So they live under the bush, under this specific bush. So he starts whacking around the bush because his missus is there going, hurry up, would you? I'm hungry. Get to the point. Get me meal. And so he's like, oh, no, but then she's like, don't beat around the bush.
What about this?
Work.
What about okay? We're in the outback in the indigenous tribe, and all the men are about to go out on the hunt, and hunt for some food. But one of the guys he's trimming this bush with some ancient tool, right? But he's actually quite scared of going on the hunt because he hasn't been on many and he hasn't had a good experience. So he's got fear.
He's more of a healer than a hunter.
Yeah, he's got a lot of this feminine energy, and maybe he feels like he should be the shaman of the tribe, and hunting's not his thing, but they need to initiate him through that. So he's trimmed the bush, so he's beat the bush with the large sickle type object, but it's done. But he keeps doing it because he wants to not go out on this hunt, and the whole group are there going, mate. Stop beating around the bush. We've got to go and get dinner for this whole tribe. And he's like, all right, and he goes, and he ends up going.
He's dragging his feet because he doesn't want to go out there, so he's just going to keep beating around the bush.
Yeah, but then he does end up going on the hunt, and then when they go out on the hunt, an unforeseen mishap happens on the hunt for the animal, and one of the other hunters gets really, really hurt, and then he actually steps down and puts his hands over the wound and heals the wound with his hands, and the rest of the hunters step back in awe and go, "Oh my God, this man is a shaman!" And from then on, he becomes the shaman of the tribe, and is a healer from there on. From there on.
And he can beat around as many bushes as he wants to.
Yeah, and he does. He beats around bushes and gets certain plants for certain remedies, because that's what his calling was.
I don't know which dark part of me just thought of that one. Should I? No.
I reckon I've been thinking the same thing the whole time, and I wasn't going to say it either.
Okay. I'm going to run with it. So there's a prostitute in old England in the 1700s, in like down at the docks in London, and this sailor's been out at sea, and he pulls in and he goes to the pub, and she sidles up to him, and she's like, "Hey, honey, do you want to be?" He's like, "Fuck yeah, I've been out at sea for months, of course, I need some action." And gets in there, and the 1700s, they haven't heard of taking care of the landscape.
Yeah.
And and she's in a rush as well. She's trying to get clients through. She's like, "I need to make some money." And he's like sitting there. He's like, "Oh, I'm cherishing this. I'm just gonna take my time with this. It's been so long."
This
and
wasn't
she's
what
like,
I was
"Fucking
thinking.
stop beating around the bush, would you? Stop beating around the bush."
And it would have been quite the bush back then too.
It would have been a thick hedge, perhaps.
A thick hedge.
And so she's just grabbed him and just, basically had her way with him. And he's left very disappointed because he wanted to savour the moments. But time is of the essence. Time is money. So don't beat around the bush.
Both of those are real possibilities.
So the source of that people either came from ancient Australia or London town in the 1700s.
Yeah. Or oh no, it's a different time period, isn't it? I was going to say both could happen at the same time. You know how that happens, like with the group consciousness, how like an animal, like I can't remember, it was a bird, I think. Like birds learnt how to use a stick to get sap out of a tree, and it was really amazing. They just documented it, and then literally within the next couple of days on the other side of the planet, birds started doing the same thing, and the birds can't like communicate across each other, but it's like that information was picked up in the collective. That's really interesting.
That is. Have you read a book called The 8 Master Lessons of Nature?
No.
Can I highly recommend it to you?
I'm going to write that down.
By Gary Ferguson. Listeners, I think it's one of the most important books I've read. There you go.
Wow.
The 8 Master Lessons of Nature. Because obviously my work is based in Buddhist philosophy, and I talk to clients about living within the laws of nature, and I've always found it odd how humanity and humans seem to think we're outside of nature, and we tend to look at nature, we tend to use nature, we tend to walk through nature, instead of understanding that we are a part of nature. We're just another species within nature. So it's all these. I always advise clients to look to nature for advice because it's so simple. It's like one tree's not sitting there judging another tree for being different, so what can we learn from nature? And then I came across this book called The 8 Master Lessons of Nature. I'm like, I'm
going to check
you,
that
Gary
out.
Ferguson. Amazing.
I'm checking that one out. But today we're talking
Don't beat around the bush, man.
Let's stop beating around the bush. We're going to just talk about the 4 agreements today. A lot of you listening would have heard of this book by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's one that both
because
myself...
he's your man crush.
He's my man crush because,
Did you hear your voice then?
What happened to it? What did it do?
Yeah, he's my man crush.
It went high, did it? Okay.
Let
me put my deep voice back on.
Go on, Barry White.
So anyway, I've got a bit of a man crush on Don Miguel. That's my drive-through voice. We've spoken about that before. Drive-through at McDonald's voice. Because there's a lot. There's so many books out there. There's so many, wisdoms, teachings. A lot of them are really getting.
Self-help.
A lot of them are getting to the same kind of point. Yeah,
Yeah.
just with a different perspective. I haven't met Don Miguel Ruiz. I would love to one day. He's obviously getting older now and got health concerns, and maybe in another life. But I always look to obviously the wisdom that is in these books and teachings for people, but you also look at the individual and the human themselves. And a lot of the time, we're always kind of subconsciously asking, "Do I want what this guy wants? Do I want what this guy is? And he seems to be one that really embodies all of these teachings, and someone who's got it. He doesn't just write about these teachings. He lives it and he's got it.
Well,
And
he's genuine and authentic, and that's in Catherine Ingram's book, the Awakened Awareness, a Compassionate Presence. Sorry,
Yep.
and the 7 qualities of compassionate presence. One's embodiment, and I talked to Shane, who's doing some work with me now, and I spoke to him about how we need to embody this, how we need to live and breathe this. Otherwise, what's the term? Practice what you preach.
Mhm.
We don't want to preach it, we want to teach it, but you teach best by leading by example. I think Don Miguel and Eckhart Tolle and all those, they embody the work that they do. They're not just
Yeah,
the latest science, the latest psychology, the latest research. This is deep, ancient wisdom.
it's ancient wisdom, and I've spoken to people and heard people who've been to his retreats and met him and that kind of thing, and they said it's like he'll hug you, not knowing who you are, and it feels like he's hugging a long lost lover who
Oh,
he
wow.
hasn't seen in years. And they said they'll watch him in the morning and he'll watch a sunrise or a sunset, and it's like he's seeing it for the first time in his life. He's just in so much awe. And to me, that is someone who really does embody. And I've read all of his books, and I even have done I did an online course of his 4 or 5 years ago, and he has that childlike nature. Obviously, so much wisdom, which is put into this book that he's written, as well as his others, but also that very childlike nature. And I mean, the book is based on ancient Toltec wisdom, and the ancient Toltecs believe that this thing's a dream. Like we're living a dream here, and that our life is a piece of art. Yeah, and so at the end of our life, we say, well, what's my piece of art been like? What have I painted here? And how we live our life is that representation. And so this book, and we're going to jump into the 4 agreements one at a time. But it's funny, like this book's kind of a pathway out of a lot of the beliefs that me and you bang on about so much on this podcast.
This was the first book I read as part of my journey on doing the work, I suppose. And it was such simple philosophies. In fact, what I've come to realise is I took these to the nth degree, which didn't help. So all of these books, if you subscribe too hard to them, you become rigid. So it's about finding that balance with them, and I'll explain a bit more about that as we go through. But we've spoken about this before as well, how in our society we don't have our elders or our shamans or our whatever. So I think the Don Miguel of the world, they're our modern day elders, I suppose. They're handing on this wisdom and this knowledge through storytelling in book form, not sitting around a campfire.
Yeah, and it's a lot of storytelling, because that's how we tend to disseminate information. And if there's really a premise to the book, it is to reduce suffering, self-imposed suffering, because he talks a lot about the domestication of humans. Yeah, so we've been.
I did an Instagram post this morning, and I started the caption underneath it with "Once upon a time there was da 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 da," and I read over it again later, and as soon as you hear those words, "Once upon a time," it's like your imagination comes alive, and you start going, "Yeah, what happened? What happened?" It's like your mind opens, and you're in a state where you can absorb more instead of trying to analyze it all.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like you can. would start writing blogs when we started the business, and you can list like exactly like his steps of what to do when you're in this current situation, and people are like, oh yeah, it's like it's. But if you put stories, analogies, and all that in there, we start to understand a lot more. And it's like movies. Like every movie's the same premise. It's the same story.
Yeah.
We're just inserting different characters. And
Well, I mean, Viktor Frankl's work I love, but my client again this morning, I recommended she read that, Man's Search for Meaning, and she found it really hard. She goes, he's not a good writer. And I imagine if his book was in story form, it'd be so much more powerful, where you come across Way of the Peaceful Warrior. I mean, that's just an amazing story, and the lessons are wrapped up in the story and in the narrative. It's not do this, do that. It's not an instruction manual.
yes.
So, and what's the fifth agreement?
The fifth agreement is. I've read that book, so I really should know
Yeah,
it.
same. I've got it. I keep lending all my books out to people, and so if you're listening and you've got one of my books, would you mind sending it back? I also listen to him on YouTube. If you get on YouTube and search for The Mastery of Love, there's a free audio book of that on YouTube.
That's actually my favourite Don Miguel Ruiz book. That is not just for life, for relationships. That is a amazing book. The Mastery of Love. It's a great follow-on from the Four Agreements.
Yeah. So start with the Four Agreements and then jump into the Mastery of Love, and you can listen to it or read it. But,
I can't. I just tried to Google it. I can't. I've read the book, but I can't remember what the fifth agreement
the
is.
Fifth Agreement. It can come up on Google.
Yeah, but I couldn't find what it actually was. I was just trying to sell me the book. But we're talking about the Four Agreements today. So we're going to go through one at a time. So some people listening, I'm sure you have read the book, so we're just going to give our take on it, how we kind of implement it into our life. It's funny, it's such a small book, it's such an easy read, but it's just, it's so powerful at the same time. It's funny, Melissa is in the process of, she's just finished writing a book and going through the editing and process, publishing thing, and that kind of jazz. And she's like, oh, how many words is a book meant to have? And I'm like, it's like there's always the publisher. Well, if it's in this genre, it should be 40 to 60,000 words, blah blah blah. And then we brought up Don Miguel Ruiz because I think she had like 18,000 words or something. I'm like, yeah, I don't know how many is in Don Miguel's, but it's bugger all, and it's so powerful. So it's like you want to let go of the number and just the wisdom.
It's not the quantity; it's more the quality.
Yeah, and I find like whenever I'm reading a Don Miguel book, like life just seems a bit easier. Because it's like he explains things that are just, it's so simple and there's such deep truth in it. It's like part of you already knows all this stuff, but it's good to be reminded that it's all in there. So let's start with the first agreement. The first agreement is be impeccable with your word. So I'll just reel off just a couple of the little subcategories of that one, and then we can sort of have a bit of a riff back and forward. So what does be impeccable with your word mean? Speak with integrity. Say only what you mean. Avoid using the word to speak against yourself or to gossip about others. Use the power of your word in the direction of truth and love. And he says this is the most important one.
Marinate in that. While I was listening, I went through my Buddhist filter, and on the Eightfold Path is right speech. So it's basically just saying the same thing again. And I often ask clients to observe what they're saying, because I had a client once and he wanted to lose some weight, and then his next sentence was, but I fucking hate running. And then he kept speaking, and I just paused him and I said, did you hear what you just said there? And he goes, no. I said, you said I fucking hate running. Like that's a pretty heavy sentence.
Yeah.
And it's so misaligned with what you're actually trying to achieve. So your belief isn't aligned with what you're trying to create. And he's like, I genuinely had no idea I just said that.
Yep.
And so imagine how much of what we say we're not mindful of. We're not actually present and choosing what we're expressing to another person, and usually a lot of it's vitriol, it's suffering, it's projection, it's it's not healthy, it's not nurturing, it's not constructive.
And for me, I think that the first sub point, that speak with integrity, is important. It's like, I remember, because I was always a people pleaser, and if for whatever reason someone asked me to do something, I would normally bloody do it. But if for whatever reason I really couldn't do it, you know, I would always make up some bullshit excuse. It's like, oh, nah, love, I've got to go and see mum and help with this and blah, blah, blah. And so it's not
So
speaking
you'd
with
lie.
integrity.
Oh.
So I lie. And so I know, since going through what I went through and doing the work, you know, I always have people, I remember early on, it would be that they get it now. I don't get asked out as much, but they would be like, hey, we're going, there's a party at Thingo's house, so we're going out here, you coming? And I'm like, nah. And they're like, oh, you got something else on? I'm like, I know, I'm probably just going to have a bath and read a book. They're like, what? And so all of a sudden, it's just that you, because what you do,
We're speaking with integrity. Then you're speaking, you're setting a boundary and you're holding it. So you're prioritizing yourself.
And that whole thing, that integrity, like the lying thing, it's like, it doesn't matter whether you get away with a lie or not, because you know that you've done it. Like we spoke about this.
And you have to remember it too.
Yeah, look, we're always watching. You know, we can't escape that. I don't know if it was last episode or a couple ago, and you said it's like the silly things that we do, and like, you know, we might have that chocolate wrapper and we'll try and hide the wrapper at the bottom of the bin so no one finds it. But it's like, you saw it. It doesn't matter if the rest of the family caught you. You saw it, right? And so every time that I speak about this with clients, like every time that we do something like that, or we don't do what we say we're going to do. So if I make a commitment to, like, you know, tomorrow morning I'm getting up and I'm doing yoga, and I get up and I don't, and there's no reason. I get up, I feel fine, I just don't do it. What I'm doing is, it's like if I'm a video game character and there's a bar there, my bar of self-respect and self-esteem goes down a little bit. And if I keep doing that over and over again, my self-esteem and self-integrity just keeps going down. Whereas if I do speak my truth and do what I say, it'll start to go up.
Well, your self-love will diminish, won't it?
Of course.
But and then it leads to shame, though. You become ashamed that you didn't do it, or you become ashamed of your actions. So instead of owning it and embracing it wholeheartedly, and saying, fuck it, yeah, I did it. I ate that, or I drank that, or I didn't get up and do yoga. You know, there's that accountability. So you lose that accountability. This is where I fucked up with these 4 agreements. So listeners, I'm going to explain a trap for you not to fall into. Because it took me a long time to get out of this trap. So I was like, be impeccable with your word. Yeah, be integrity. Yeah. So no more little white lies, no more facades. It's just raw, honest, open truth. A lot of people like the truth until you're honest with them, and then you just become a prick. So, because you become too confronting. So once again, I had to temper this agreement. But also, another trap I fell into was when I hear people not being impeccable with their word, I take it personally. Which is
That's the second agreement.
I would be offended that they were being deceitful, and
which is where the wording is so important, isn't it? It's be impeccable with your word. Whereas not everyone should be impeccable with their word.
Don't create a cognitive distortion that you expect everyone else to subscribe to what you do.
Yeah, and it's also an important point that he says, it's like, use the power of your word, and the power of your word. I love how, like, it's called spelling. It's like we're casting a spell. I love that analogy as well. But it says, in the direction of truth and love, right? Now, there's a guy, what's his bloody name? I can't remember now, but anyway, he's written a book, I think, and he lived the complete honesty thing for like 6 months, right?
Wow.
So that, like, we're talking like, if his wife
Jim Carrey,
if his wife,
Man or whatever,
if his wife tried on an outfit and she says, "How do I look?" and his head said, "You look fat," he'd say, "You look fat like a fat bitch," and he would do it, like he would say it 100%.
Wow.
Yeah, and he lived this for like 6 months, and I don't know how his his marriage
His
survived.
Like Jim Carrey in Liar Liar. That's the
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah, and so he lived that. So, but then, well, I think it's important the distinction. It's like use the power of your word in the direction of truth and love. So it's like that doesn't mean say everything that comes to mind, because a lot of this stuff is not believing what your mind says as well. Because it's like you're being impeccable with your word. If your mind says that like I'm a piece of shit or I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy, that's not impeccable as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the things that you have to catch. So it's not.
But when I
just
said
saying,
I took this to the nth degree, that was me using that binary thinking or black and white thinking. So it was I just have to speak the truth. I can't. But I forgot the old in the direction of truth and love, and don't expect others to do it as well. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, you must have missed that bit.
I was so absorbed in it, and yeah.
It's because when you're it's like you read something or you have a new teaching and you're like, this is really powerful stuff. So it's always at the front of your mind. So that's a new filter, and that's why you pick up in yourself, but then you start picking it up in other people as well. And it's like you're talking shit. I can tell. Okay, so be impeccable with your word. That's the first one. I think. Say only what you mean. Avoid using.
What
the
if you
word.
really mean that someone's fat?
Yeah.
Well, because you use the power of your word in direction of truth and love. So maybe, hey, you may look unhealthy, but I love you. So is there anything I can do to? No, because it's still a judgment, isn't it?
It's still a judgment. Yeah. I think this is most important with the way that we speak to ourselves, and also, because you know what I mean.
Be kind to yourself.
Be kind to yourself. Yeah. Because what we say to ourselves becomes our reality.
Yeah, but we treat others how we treat ourselves, and we can't give away something we don't have. So if we don't have self-love and self-kindness, we can't then treat others around us that way. So yeah, be impeccable with your word to yourself.
So direct what we say to ourselves with the intention of truth and love.
And when you know that other people are hiding behind their facade, behind a false facade or a mistruth or a white lie or an outright deception, step into compassion and understand they're doing that for a reason.
Yeah.
And instead of judging them and saying, no, like what I used to do, be impeccable with your word. No, go into compassion and, okay, they're doing that for a reason, and that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, number 2, don't
What are you
take any...
laughing
No, there was a story, Don Miguel actually had a big heart bypass thing and nearly died, and this is when he wrote, it hit the latest book, he wrote a book called the Toltec Art of Life and Death, and this is a totally different book to his other one. This is a bigger book, it's much longer, it's very different. I recommend read all the other books if you're into it first before jumping into this, because it's interesting, but it's
a weighty tomb.
Yeah, it's big, but I think there was a story like he was in the hospital bed, and one of his sons came in, and his son was just too emotional and like all over the place and everything, and Don Miguel just with the most compassion, but also like just basically said, because he's in a vulnerable state and he needs people to be in a good container. And he just said, son, I love you, but go out and sort your emotions and before you come back in and speak to me again. Like, but the way he says things is like through this like, I don't know, it's
filter.
It's like when I did his online course, like it was a video one, and like he's basically stabbing you the whole time, telling you like all this crap that you've been believing about yourself, but it's like a little joyful kid telling you. You had to, at the start of, well, where have I got it written? I've got it written somewhere, but I remember the start of the course, I was going through my old notepads and stuff, and I had pads from this course that I did years ago, and one of the first things you have to write is, because they call, the Toltecs call the voice up here, these negative voices, the parasite, the beliefs, these limiting beliefs like parasites in the mind. And our identity is essentially a parasite, this idea of who we are, all these deficiency stories. And so what you had to do, you had to literally write, and you were meant to look at each day, my name is Ryan, I'm a parasite, and I create my life full of drama. It's like start with truth and write that
Well,
down.
remember the CBT course I did, and the little dude up front was like, "You're all
Yeah,
ignorant, you're all incompetent, you're all mediocre,"
yeah,
and I throw that at my clients, and they're sitting in a belief system of I must be loved, I must be perfect, and I must get what I want, and all of a sudden I'm hitting them with you're incompetent, you're mediocre, and you're ignorant. And it triggers them into so much suffering. But then we temper it with, no, that's only to a degree, as we all are, and that's okay. So you can't change without that truth. You need something to break that illusion.
yeah. Truth. It has to start with truth. That's why, like everyone who's like when I do future work with people, it's like let's start off with really honestly where we are now, because people can sit there and do their affirmations. You know how it's like state your affirmations in the present tense. I am rich. I am abundant. Blah blah blah. It's like you're not.
Fake
Like
it till you make
let's
it.
yeah. It's like that's fine. We can work it out. We can start to create that, but you need to be super honest about where you're at the minute. Otherwise, you've got an incorrect starting point in terms of your growth. So let's keep moving on. So don't take anything personally. This is yeah, wow. Easier said than done, yeah?
Yep.
This is what... So
Well, because we think the world revolves around us. That's
Yes.
essentially what it comes down to.
Yes.
So we make it all about me, I. And so, yeah, we're passing everything through this I am so important filter. So, yeah.
So the analogy, I think it's in that book. If not, it's in one of his other books. But I love this analogy because we are the center of our universe. That's true. But so's everyone else is the center of their universe. And Don Miguel uses this wonderful analogy of the movie theater, where you walk into a movie theater and there's all the different, cinemas. I don't know how many there are. And so you just end up there and you walk into one of the cinemas and there's just one person sitting there watching a movie. And you sort of like, and you walk up and you sit behind this person and you're watching a movie and you realise this movie, you're like, hang on, I recognise these characters. There's my mum, there's my dad, there's my brother, there's my friend. And you realise you're watching a movie of your life, right? And then you're like, yeah, this makes sense. That's what mum's like. That's what dad's like. Yeah, that's what that blah, blah, blah. And it all makes complete sense. And then you kind of look around at that one person in the cinema and it's you. It's you watching your movie of your life. And you're like, well, that was interesting. So you get up and you walk out of the theatre and you go into the next theatre. And this time you sit down and there's one person again in the theatre and you start watching the movie and you're like, oh, I recognise the characters. And sorry, in the first movie, you were the main character, by the way. In this movie, you're watching and you're like, oh, there's Dad. There's my brother. Oh, there's my uncle. There's my friend. And I'm like, oh, there's me. And then you're like, but this isn't how they are. And they're acting in a completely different way, right? And then you're like, that's not how I am. That's not how Dad is. And then you look around at who's in the theatre and it's your mum watching the story of her life. And you do the same thing. You can go with a friend or someone else and you realise that everyone's the main character of their story and all the secondary characters are the other people in their life. And everybody's got a different perception of who they are and who everyone else is. And it's like you have this idea of who your mum is and then you go into her theatre and see how she sees herself and it's completely different to how you see her, right? And these are the people that are closest to us, even like with our partners, like Melissa, like we spend bloody all the time together. I've got no idea and we've talked about it, but I've got no idea what I'm like in her movie and what she's like in her movie. I've only got what I'm like and what she's like in my movie, right?
Yeah.
So
your mind is like the projector, though. And
Yeah.
it's just projecting out this illusion that you then live within. And we've all got a different projector in our head. So I like to talk about how there's this massive misconception out there how we all live in the same world, where we don't. We all live on the same planet, but we all live in completely different and individual worlds. And in those worlds, we've got belief systems and morals and values and biases. And I did a spirit animal thing with a client this morning, and her spirit animal is a wolf. And I spoke to her about mine's a turtle, my girlfriend's is a butterfly. So if I walk around expecting everyone to be like a turtle, because that suits me and we can all go at my pace and it makes my life easier. Well, it's not reality. So it's that utopian ideal again. So we don't like when things are different, but we have to learn to stop making it about us and make it about the other people. And the first thing it says here is, don't take anything personally. Nothing others do is because of you. It's got nothing. You are so insignificant in the grand scheme of the whole entire universe.
Yeah, it's like that. What's the saying? It's you'd stop caring what other people think when you realise how little they think about you or how little they care. It's like, this is why when someone makes radical change in their life, let's say it's a big career change or a big relationship change, the people that have the most resistance to that tend to be family and close friends, because it's like, what's happened? What's happened? Imagine their movie, and one of their main characters or secondary characters in their movie, they've just changed their script big time, and that disrupts their movie, and they're like, "Hang on, you're off script. What are you doing?"
It's disrupted the status quo, and it's so weird. By nature, most people don't like change, even though we're constantly in change. So it's So nothing others do is because of you. What others say and do is a projection of their own reality, their own dream. When you are immune to the opinions and actions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering. So there's another expression, those that matter don't mind, and those that mind don't matter. What others think of you is none of your business. All these sort of quotes out there that relate around to this, but it's essentially, you're not responsible for what someone else does, and their actions aren't because of you.
Yeah, it's like, here's the thing. You spoke about us being just part of nature, which we are. We're just part of nature. We're just life. And it's like, this whole thing started 13.8 billion years ago with a bunch of hydrogen clouds that formed into helium and, the other elements. And I won't get into all that here, and then all of a sudden, wow. Good question. That's a very deep question, because we all were. That's where we all started. Guess what happened? I mean, the Big Bang happened. Things expanded at the speed of light. And anyway, hydrogen clouds formed. Gravity pulled them together. They fused into helium. And after all this time, the Earth formed, right? And then all this shit happened for plants to come, for flowers to come. Then there was dinosaurs. If your great-great-great-great-grandmother didn't meet your great-great-great-great-grandfather, you don't even exist. Like, all of this stuff happens, and we've got nothing to do with it. It's like, if you ask someone, how do you feel about the rings, that Saturn has rings? They're like, I don't know, it's none of my business. But as things start to get closer, we start to take things personally, right? It's like, if there's
a survival mode thing. It's we get concerned about us. It's such a primal instinct. I need to be okay. But you think about how many people outsource their happiness? The majority. Yeah, it's how many people do you hear say, "She makes me angry," or "He made me so mad," or "That made me so upset"? No, it didn't. Your reaction to that stimulus was to become whatever feeling you entered into.
And this is where the work is. This is where
but this is where the I talk about, my whole job is based around reducing unnecessary suffering, and I've completely forgot that Don Miguel said you won't be the victim of needless suffering. So that's when we stop outsourcing our suffering, when we learn to become emotionally self-sufficient and meet our own needs, and be inherently happy, unreasonably happy. There's no reason for my happiness. You can do what you can do. Ryan can sit there and say, Nick's hat looks shit, and I'll just sit there and observe that and go, well, that's interesting. Okay. I'm not going to give it the power that some people give it.
Yeah, that's it. You're giving it the power because it's close. It's like if it's not the rings around Saturn, it's like, well, let's say an earthworm is giving birth 100 miles from here underground, 6 feet. How do you feel about that? It's like, I don't care. That's
I'm
cool.
amazed by it. No,
Then
it's
it's
awesome.
like, oh, I'm walking across the street, and at the other side of the street, I can see an ex-girlfriend walking with another guy. How does that feel? I
Depends
think
if you've done the work.
I think that's okay. And then all of a sudden, your ex sees you across the street and then walks across and starts yelling in your face about what a cunt you were and blah blah blah. It's like it gets harder and harder the closer it gets, right? But like you spoke about earlier, your client, the boss directly having a go at her, which it feels so personal because you're one on one with a person directing their anger or their suppressed shit at you.
Well,
It
it only feels personal if you've got these sensitivities within you. So it's only going to trigger you into an emotional disturbance if you've got these sensitive parts within you, these unhealed parts within you.
Yeah. So that's, I think, for people, a takeaway is like how close can you let things get without taking them personally? And
So
that's where the
the more
work is.
the more reactive you are, the more easily triggered you are by experiences or circumstances or people's words, the more work you have to do on yourself. It's
Yes.
not, don't expect them to change to then make you happy or at peace. Go and do the fucking work yourself.
Yeah, because they're the accumulation of every single experience that they've had. And it's like you could be wearing a jumper that their abusive uncle wore when they were younger, and they don't even know, but they just don't like you because of that. And you'll be like, why don't they like me? That's I'm a good person, blah blah. And
Nothing to do
it's
with
got
you.
nothing to do with you. All right, what's the next one, Nick? What's number 3?
Well, it's funny because don't make assumptions. So don't assume that their projection has anything to do with you because
Yeah.
and this is a cognitive these two here are cognitive distortions or unhelpful thinking styles or critical thinking errors, whatever you want to call them. Taking things personally and jumping to conclusions or crystal balling or I know this is going to happen. I know he got upset because I did this. It's our minds are leaping out of the present, and as soon as your mind starts leaping, which it has a natural inclination to do because it's trying to figure out and formulate and construct a reality, but it doesn't need to. You can just leave it sit here, and once again, to go back to just observing things, it doesn't need to keep assuming what's going on.
Yeah, you imagine, your
It's a join the dot.
the girlfriend,
the join the
the
dot
girlfriend
things?
messages, right, in the morning and says, "Hey, we need to speak tonight, 5 o'clock," and that's it. And then that mind will run to so many assumptions,
Well, I said it
It'll-
before when my girlfriend sent me a message while I had a client. Said, "Hey, give me a call when you're free." We'd organised to meet up that night for dinner because of the previous week. She had a lot of other priorities and kept me pushing me down the priority list. I felt my mind trying to leap. I felt it trying to join
Yeah.
the dots, and I observed that, and I was like, "How interesting is this? Oh, this is cool." But because I was so aware of it, and because I've done all the mental reps, I could gently hold my mind and bring it back instead of letting it leap. But it wanted to leap to the conclusion that, oh, that's it, she's cancelling again, and I'm not going to get to see her, and I'm not going to get what I want, and I'm not going to be loved, and it's not going to be perfect, and it's all going to end in tears.
which is all a need for certainty and control, isn't it?
Well, but that need for control is based in anxiety. It's based in a fear.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're such fear-driven
And
creatures.
I think we've
That's why the mind
we've
starts
spoken
leaping.
about this before. It's also not being comfortable sitting in a space of I don't know.
I heard
and,
this cool expression earlier. It said people aren't afraid of being lonely. People are afraid of being with themselves
Mm,
and being with their own minds. Because
Yeah.
once you have to sit there and get to know yourself, you can come into a lot of weird understandings.
Oh, of course. And we're finding this so much now there in Melbourne with lockdown, like with clients, because they're like, I need to start doing some work because I haven't got anything to do, and all this weird shit's coming up. the leading loneliness expert. This was in Johan Hari's book, Lost Connections, doing studies on loneliness, and there was no correlation between how lonely someone felt and how alone they were. Like physically not around people. It had no correlation whatsoever. It's not, it doesn't, it just means that, because you can feel lonely in amongst a whole crowd of people.
Oh, the loneliest I've ever felt was in my marriage.
Yep.
And I was living under the same roof as someone, so I was constantly around someone, but because there was no connection, because there was such a distinct disconnection, I felt very lonely.
Yeah. One of the points under this one, which I'll just bring up quickly, it says find the courage to ask questions and express what you really want, which obviously helps not make assumptions, because you can actually ask. I was speaking to a client last week who is, once lockdown's over, they want to have this career change and just go back and study. We were just having a bit of a chat about that, and obviously he said, there's some nerves around going back to school, because his experience, he hadn't done, like, school was for him 20 years ago, and I said, what was your experience of school? And it was like, I hated it, I was just trying to fit in, I slept half the time, or I didn't go, and this is one of the big problems with school. We're in a socialization phase and everyone's trying to fit in, so no one wants to put their hand up and sound silly by asking a question, which is what we need most. And I was explaining to him, I'm like, mate, going back and studying something that you're really interested in is going to be such a beautiful and different experience for you. I remember me, when I went back and started doing the diploma in mental health and AOD, I would never ask questions at high school and that kind of thing. Like, I just didn't want to put myself out there and just stay hidden, and in that class, because it's something you're interested in, and you're an adult now, it's like, I didn't quite understand that. Can you just explain that a bit more? What does that mean? Blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, your learning becomes so much better as well.
Well, you're not that version of you. You're such hopefully a more evolved version with a different capacity.
Because we don't want to feel like we don't know something. Like, even just chatting with friends will bring something up, and you're like, oh yeah, that, yeah.
We don't want to look stupid. That's it.
Yeah.
We don't want to look stupid.
And that happened with me, with my best mate. Because I just stopped watching news for a long time, and we'd catch up, and he'd be like, oh, what about years ago, some major event had happened, and I'm just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he's like, it was in Italy, there was a huge bombing and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, he's like, it's literally been all over. I'm like, can you just tell me about it? And he told me, and he goes, yeah, look it up. I'm like, no, you just told me, we're all good now. And I remember my dad, this is a couple of years ago, this is because my mum and dad, I hope mum and dad don't listen to, dad won't, mum might, but like, my dad is fucking obsessed with watching news. Like, they will watch the 6 o'clock news, then change channel for a 6:30, then the ABC news at 7. And I remember I was there at Lakes Entrance a couple of years ago, and I'm eating dinner with them because I want to connect everything, but the news is on, and then mum's like, but something ScoMo, and I turn and I'm like, who's ScoMo? And my dad looked at me, it was so funny. He goes, Ryan, he's the Prime Minister of our country. Like, with the most disappointed eyes, and I'm like, Dad, when this comes, talk to me about mental health, talk to me about all that stuff. I'll talk. I have no fucking idea what's going on when it comes to the news.
I'm in Camp Ryan, because I had no idea who ScoMo was either. But it's that, that aversion to looking stupid, and I think if we can. It says find the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want. We have such an aversion again to expressing our needs. So I talk to clients about, tell someone how you feel, tell them what you need, but then ask them if they can do that for you. So, hey Ryan, I'm feeling a bit lost. Can you give me a bit of guidance? Is that something that you're capable of doing? So you check in just to make sure the person can do it or not, and you're all on the same page. Yes, Nick, no worries. I'll help you through. Here you go. Here's such and such and such. Oh, cheers, mate. Where if you don't ask for that, you don't communicate, and you don't express or ask questions, and it comes back to that childlike nature. I talk to clients about holding that space, but put the frame around that space of curiosity and wonder. So I'm curious to learn what you just experienced then, instead of jumping into a judgment. Or, oh, I wonder what would happen if, we're more open-minded instead of jumping to a conclusion. Oh, I know you're going to. No, you don't. Just start with I wonder, or I'm curious, and see what happens.
I was listening, just this brought up a memory years ago, listening to a podcast, and Christine Hassler, who I quite like, she's cool, and she was just talking about she had an experience where she had her house broken into, there was burglars and that kind of jazz, and she said she was just noticing the reactions that people had in her life, and most guys, and this is advice for men, most guys is like, that must have been so fucked for you, that must have been so scary, the guys who did it, we should find them and we should fuck them up and blah blah blah. And then she said she sat down at lunch with a guy and he'd done a lot of work on himself and everything, and all he said was, wow, that must have been so scary for you, tell me what you felt like, tell me your experience. Yeah, and it's just, once again, it's just opening it up.
I wouldn't even go into it must have, because that's making an assumption. I would have
yeah.
Oh, what was that like for you? Tell me, help me, explain it to me, help me to understand.
Yeah.
Because we all would have experienced it completely differently. It's funny, I laughed because I read in that. So find the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want. Communicate with others as clearly as you can to avoid misunderstandings, sadness, and drama. Fuck off. So much of humanity is so attached to drama and has this desire for drama. Like, there's literally a genre of movies called drama. There's like, people love drama. They love over dramatization. That's why television is so popular, and all those stupid magazines at the bloody checkout at the supermarket of Jen and Brad have grown second heads. It's they pump drama into humanity, and people get so conditioned to it.
Oh, people love it. People go mad for it. What's Jennifer Aniston's crazy new diet and haircut, like. Yeah, and one of the earlier ones, which was the gossip one, that was Impeccable with your word. Avoid using the word to speak against yourself or to gossip about others. And we've spoken about gossip on this podcast before. It's just like...
It was like Eleanor Roosevelt quote about small minds discuss people, more mature minds discuss ideas or something like that.
Yeah, it's so true. Right now with this one in my life, the assumptions one says communicate as clearly as you can to avoid misunderstandings. I get caught up in this a lot because look, with Melissa, I'm setting different boundaries now. I think we've spoken about this before, and trying to communicate those. And then also, like you said, making sure they're reasonable boundaries. And if not, well, let's find a compromise. But I run into the trouble where I think about something so much in my head, I feel like it's already been a conversation. So it's like I've thought about it in my head so much that I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this, and she's like, oh, you haven't told me about that. I'm like, oh, I've just told it myself in my head 100 times. So once again, that's a communication thing.
Yeah, I had that with my girlfriend a couple of weeks ago, Emma, and it was, her kids were her priority, and I was completely fine with that. But a part of me forgot to express that I would like to just catch up and just drop in and have a cup of tea with her or something. I had that conversation in my head and then forgot to express it. And then when it didn't happen, I was like, I can't believe we haven't even caught up for a cup of tea yet. Did you express it? Fuck, shut up.
Because we've already had the discussion in the mind, and it's escalated in our own mind. Once again, in our own movie. This is how easy it is to set people around us up to fail, and this is a cognitive distortion to create an expectation that they should mind read, they should make an assumption, they should make a leap of understanding and just automatically and instinctively know what my needs are. Most people don't even know what their own needs are, let alone your needs. So if you don't express them, if you don't say, hey, it's in a really extraordinary period of time, isolation, I can't even leave my house to see, I haven't seen another person in 5 days. I know you've got lots going on with your kids, but can I just swing past for a cuppa? Yeah.
Like, if I don't say that, then when it doesn't happen, I sit there and I start fuming. I'm like, oh, that bitch, she doesn't care about me. She doesn't fucking love me. I'm not a priority. And then you start disqualifying the positives, and you start
You should
bouncing
know.
between
You should have known.
distortions and disturbance, distortion.
Yeah.
Oh, the playful mind. It's a
And that's why the last little subheading of this agreement is, with just this one agreement, you can completely transform your life. It's true.
yeah.
Like, it's true. I mean, if you stop or if you drastically reduce the assumptions that you're making in your life, you're stepping more into the reality of what is.
Yep. Oh,
Love
that's yeah. Most people live in the reality of what they think should happen instead of the reality of what is, as you said. So.
Yeah, yeah. It's like if I
What's
you
the
go
last
if,
one,
if-
Hass?
last one. Always do your best.
Oh, that sounds nice.
Now we need the subheadings are very, very important for this, because that sounds like, I've got to be killing it every single day. But the
Well,
subheadings
before we go into those subheadings, can we just loop back around to we're all incompetent, we're all mediocre, we're all ignorant.
Mhm.
So everyone is doing the best. Your girlfriend, your mum, your dad, your wife, your boss, everyone is literally doing the best they can at that point in time. But people take it personally and go, well, you're not doing these things. No one wakes up in the morning. Your boss doesn't wake up at 5 a.m. and go, today I'm going to make Debbie's life hell. And I'm going to give her all this paperwork and I'm going to tell her to stay back late because I know she's got a date tonight and I'm just going to purposely interfere with her life. But that doesn't happen. It does not happen. But people take it personally after they've made the assumption and they don't understand that we're all incompetent, we're all mediocre. None of us can be the best at everything. We're always going to ebb and flow. So
the truth is, we're all everything.
Oh, you knew that was coming. You jumped to an assumption.
we're all everything. I love
What do you mean by that, Ryan?
Dr. John D. Martini's work is all about balancing perceptions and owning traits. And so he's like, if a trait in someone else pisses you off, it's because you haven't owned that trait in yourself. And he's a very fastidious man. He does the work. I watched there's a really good video of him on positive thinking, around how he heard positive thinking was the way to go, and he went through 2 years, and I can't. He read literally every single book there was at that time on positive thinking. He took the most used positive thinking words out of all of those books, summarized them, and put them on notes. He had reminders on his phone. Anyway, there's this whole process of 2 years, and he would monitor it by checking in with alarms how he was feeling on a score of like -10 to +10. So he's goes hard. Anyway, after 2 years, he realized, on average, he was right in the middle after all of that work and all of that time. And that's when he sort of realized that everything is neutral, right? And there's always two sides to something, and you can tell yourself positive stuff as much as you want. There's this neutral part. But anyway, the point that I'm getting to is he talks about traits, and he went in and to the dictionary to find out like how many traits are there of human beings, and there was I think it was 700 or something, and he went through all 700, and he found out at some point in his life where he'd exhibited that trait. So then he does that with other people, and he's like, we all are all the traits. It's like we're humans, we're this creature, this animal, and we exhibit all of these traits. And so the traits that then we decide that we don't like and we try and suppress, is where we start to see them in other people and not like them, right? Because then this comes down to shadow work and that kind of thing. So I always like that we are everything. Like every trait that a human being is capable of, we have exhibited at some point in our life.
But if you're stuck in a belief that, and it's a cognitive distortion as well, it's an irrational belief that's created this cognitive distortion. If you have this belief that my mum should have loved me more as a child, once again, you're living in the reality of what you think should happen, then you're stuck. You're keeping yourself stuck
Yeah.
in that suffering, where you can step out of it by stop making it about you and make it about your mum, and coming at it from compassion and empathy and go, oh well, what actually was mum experiencing at the time? Oh, well, she was only really young, she was by herself, she didn't have any support around her, she was doing 2 jobs, and all of a sudden you make it about this other person and you go, oh fuck, I've been stuck in this pity party for such a long time.
Yeah.
And
It's acceptance. Yeah,
you go around popping all these balloons at your own pity party and walk out the door.
Yeah, so that's what we do with clients. So once we go back and find out where these places they're stuck, we deal with our emotion around what happened. You know, when mum didn't love me, they use that in his example, and then we go back and we start tuning into mum and seeing what's because when you're because that's all we do. We're very narcissistic as kids. Everything's about us, and we're just like, what does this say about me? But once I deal with me,
a lot of people carry that into adulthood as well.
100%. And so then that's right. We can look at mum, we can look at dad, we can look at whoever it was, and oh my God, they were just like everyone in every moment, like you said, are doing the absolute best they can with their current level of consciousness. And once we realise that, we can accept them for who they were at that moment and who they are now. And then acceptance is great. You can find really good resolution with acceptance. But then even sometimes if we can go into gratitude and be like, oh my God, they actually were doing a really good job based on the circumstances they were in. We can even be grateful for them, whereas before we were pissed off at them.
And I used to use acceptance and forgiveness as the keys to freedom and to happiness. But I realised if you still have a need to forgive someone, then you haven't accepted.
Yeah.
Because forgiving someone still means that they've done something wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's that trap. So yeah, acceptance and gratitude, or acceptance and empathy, or acceptance and compassion, or something like that.
All of this stuff can be a trap, because even the whole idea of working on yourself means that you're deficient. Yeah. It's like only
if you frame it that way, or you can frame it as I am trying to evolve. So I had to marry two beliefs. Today I'm the best version of me I can. Today I am enough, so I'm not deficient. Yeah. But tomorrow is an opportunity for me to grow or to evolve a little bit.
I like the analogy of just this is my human. Ryan's my human vessel. And I want him to have maybe a different experience. Like, so and this is what I say with people. I see drug addicts now, and I'm like, there's nothing wrong with you. I don't see you as less or more than someone who's a saint as opposed to a drug addict. There's no difference. But it's like, if you want to have a different experience in life, then we can work on that. But we don't want to come at it from a place of deficiency, because it's just like, once again, we're reinforcing the idea.
Well, what you're doing is loving them, right? And love is the absence of judgment.
Yeah.
So you're not judging this person. You're not labeling them, which is a cognitive distortion. You're not labeling them as a drug addict. You're just observing them as a human being. And so you've gotten out of that binary thinking, good, bad, right, wrong, positive, negative, and you're working more in that spectrum thinking.
Yeah.
Which is we're all just at different degrees. Okay.
And we can do that with ourselves.
Exactly.
That's why a lot of people, like, if I'm overweight, I'm not. Like, I'm in good shape here. Look at those guns.
Hello, Des and Troy. Good to see you guys.
Des and Troy.
Destroy.
I didn't get that.
Put a Des and Troy together.
Des and Troy. If I'm overweight by like 50 kilos and I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, you're such a fucking fat piece of shit, you gotta lose weight, blah, 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 right? Now, this is what people do, right? Let's be serious. Let's be real. And so what happens, oftentimes you might start to lose weight and revert back. And sometimes people do lose the weight. But it's like, what fuel am I using?
It's not sustainable.
I'm using a dirty coal. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for my internal environment. I might get to where I'm going, but it's not ideal. Whereas if I look at myself and go, I love this person. I accept this person because
I'm going to treat it well.
Yeah, but I want to have the experience of having a 50 kilo lighter body, right? Then I do
Yeah,
things
but
with it.
you're gonna treat it better because you love it, and so when you treat something where you're not punishing it, you're not overstuffing it, you're not self-medicating with alcohol or donuts or ice cream or whatever.
Yeah,
But it's funny, isn't it? Like there's never been anything wrong with me. I've done so much work to escape unnecessary suffering, but there's never been anything wrong with me.
This is the paradox, right?
Isn't it?
This is what I'm talking about.
I know, I love it.
There's nothing wrong with anyone.
No, but but there's so much work that we can do.
That's what I'm saying. Like, we shouldn't have jobs, or we should be doing different jobs. Like, I'm serious. Like, there's the ultimate realization that people will come to is they'll go, oh, none of this shit that I'm holding on to from the past matters at all because it's over and it's done, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with me as a human being.
My client this morning touched on that. And she said a friend of hers that she went to uni with, she found out on Facebook that she'd passed away, and this thought entered her head. She goes, "Nothing really matters." And I was like, "Have you been listening to Metallica?" And she's like, "Nothing really. It's all just bullshit. It's we get so caught up and so wound up because of the attachments we've got of what we want and what we think should happen, etc." And she said, "None of it is important at all. But we get so caught up in the bullshit and the mediocrity of it all that we forget what's truly important."
And that's when it's like you then have to decide how you're going to do this thing. Because I found myself when I have those realizations, I can find myself dipping into nihilism, and like nothing matters, and being in a dark place.
You become apathetic, and
you become very apathetic.
That's another trap.
Which is exactly another trap. So it's like, yes, nothing does matter, but like, how am I then going to frame that? How am I going to live my life?
Well, and there was a lot of questions around Buddhism from people who first encountered it because they found they were becoming apathetic. They were detaching. Oh, detach. The source of all suffering is attachment, so therefore I should detach. And you went, well, you can't really detach from everything, otherwise you're not connected to anything, and you are everything, as you said before. So it's learning to move past that trap and just once again come into love. It's just love everything deeply and passionately, and be engaged in life. Just don't subscribe to all the superfluous stuff. Let that pass you by and really focus on
engage in life. I think that your client earlier you're speaking about, who was listening to the music and vacuuming while she was vacuuming. She was engaged in life.
It's completely.
Yeah, because she was in that moment.
But she also sat in compassion when her boss went into suffering. She sat there and just observed her in suffering, and she was like, "Oh, this is really interesting." And she wasn't affected by this other person. She didn't buy into it. She didn't make it about her. She just sat there in awareness.
Yeah, it's hard. Look, I've had to try and learn that. Like we've spoken about being quite sensitive souls many times on the show, and running it's a bit different now, but doing online, but running an outpatient rehab, and people who are addicted, who I love so much, are in so much pain, and so you do cop a lot of shit, and that, not taking it personally, has been such a hard lesson for me, because you get people who are in a lot of pain, and they might be messaging you at a real rock bottom, and it's like, you scumbags, how dare you charge money for it's so irrational. It's like, how dare you? Like, right now we've got this Families of Addiction course, which we literally have not had one negative comment on the course. Like, we literally haven't had one. It's been all positive. It's been great. But then we've got the Facebook ads running for it, and that's where all the negativity comes in. It's $150. Right, it's probably less than going and seeing a therapist for one session, and you've got decades of experience of being addicts, thousands of sessions working, me and Matt, with family members and addicts, blah, blah, for this amount of money. And the amount of comments you get going, how dare you, making money off people's pain, you scumbags, this should be free. And you're like, oh, for fuck's sake. And it's like, and still, I've got to like try and go, okay, you can't take this personally, because people have no idea. And they're in pain themselves. You know, that saying, hurt people. I love using it all the time. Yeah, because like you said, yeah, that person, the boss doesn't get up in the morning in a really happy mood and then decide, who am I going to attack today? I'm feeling really content. Who am I going to attack today? Doesn't work that way.
We keep using the word irrational, and that's what all of this comes down to for me. Is an irrational mind creates those emotional disturbances, and it creates that suffering, and then we have a need to project that suffering onto those around us, and then we get just on that merry-go-round, and 20 years later, we're still on there.
Absolutely. So, we've done it. We're going a fair bit of time here. Let's just finish up.
You always do your best. Says your best is going to change from moment to moment. It will be different when you are healthy as opposed to sick. So once again, understanding there's an ebb and a flow, and making sure your parameters are wide enough to absorb the lowest of those lows and the highest of those highs. But we want to learn to reduce those. Instead of positive 10 to negative 10, we can get them down to around a 3 or a 4.
And that's the most important point. Like with this fourth agreement, that's the most important point, is that your best is going to change from moment to moment. And like people have this thing when it's like, always do your best. Like, well, I've got to get up every day and I've got to hustle and I've got to do. And then it's like, no, sometimes you have to accept that you just don't have that capacity. And in those moments...
Sometimes I'll walk out of a session and I can't wait to get home, and I'm just like, fucking smash that, and I can't wait to say to them, I had the best day at work today, it was so good. But then I remember, that wasn't the best day, I was just on my game. Yeah? And there's other days where I like, I was a bit subpar today, I was a bit mediocre, didn't really bring my A game, and I'm not rushing home to say to him, I was so mediocre today, I was so off my game today. So you got to get off riding that roller coaster and just sit back and accept that some days I'm going to perform, some days I'm not, and it's all okay.
Yeah. Yesterday, I had two sessions back to back, and it was I had an expectation, I had an assumption. I'm like, they were meant to be hour, maybe max an hour and a half sessions, and I'm like, they'll both be a breeze, and they both went for over 2 hours back to back, and they were fucking heavy. Anyway, I came downstairs and just poured myself a whiskey and coke, and this comes back to being impeccable with your word. Mel's like, how are the sessions? And I'm like, babe, I'm self-medicating with whiskey at the minute, and I just want to relax. We do that now instead of, because most guys especially were like, it's like, should you be having that, third glass of wine? It's like, I'm an adult, I can do what I want. It's like, let's be honest, I'm stressed and I'm self-medicating with this. Okay.
Shane, so when I was telling you earlier, I had like a really bad knot in my shoulder and in my calf, and that was just growing, and it was referring up my neck and giving me headaches and everything. And I was working, I was still performing, but outside of the sessions, I was chatting with Shane, and he's like, oh yeah, and he said he went home and said to Alicia, his partner, that Nick wasn't himself today. He was sort of a bit short and a bit grumpy, and he goes, it's like he was human. I was like, what else? And it's funny how often I hear that, because of the work we do. People think that we're these completely enlightened creatures that don't touch alcohol, that don't get angry, or that don't experience an emotional disturbance. And I'm like, I do all those things because I'm still human, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I just do them much less than the majority of people, because I do this day in and day out.
Yeah, especially it's a problem in especially like spiritual circles and that kind of thing. And it's like, you don't get angry, everything's love and light, and it's like, that's just suppression. That's just more suppression. Like Ram
Dass is a classic for it, when he keeps talking in his stuff, and he goes, no, what did he say? yeah, he wasn't expressing how he was feeling, and then people would come in and say, "Get out of here! You're stupidly happy. You're pissing me off." And then he'd laugh at himself. He'd just observe himself being upset, and then it'd pass. Where most people, in this last one, it says, "Always do your best. Under any circumstance, simply do your best, and you will avoid self-judgment, self-abuse, and regret." So that's just compounding our suffering. As soon if we don't just observe that we're in a sensitive spot and we've been a bit angry, if we beat ourselves up for being angry, then we're just compounding it.
We're reinforcing that. Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of this I do like the analogy with a lot of these is this it's self-respect, self-esteem, it's acceptance, it's self-love, and the bar's going to go down or it's going to go up. And a lot of people, their bar keeps going down, and the further that bar goes down, the more we feel like we don't deserve a good life, we don't deserve to be happy, and then we fall into drugs and alcohol. But if we get that thing, self-esteem up, then all of a sudden we attract the right people into our life in the right circumstances.
That's that deficiency. When it goes down, we think we're deficient. So
yeah, deficiency.
Look at things. Well, this has been quite the John Holmes episode, hasn't it? It's been a long one.
And thanks to everyone who got that reference as well. All you blokes out there, I'm sure got it. All you ladies may get it.
The 80s.
The grew up in the 80s, yeah. So yeah, if you haven't already read the Four Agreements, we recommend you read it. And if you have, revisit it. I've probably read it maybe 4 times now. I reckon about once a year I'll pick it up and have a go for it. And if you've read that, highly recommend The Mastery of Love. Like if you want to talk about relationships and what a real beautiful relationship can look like, that book is...
It's great to listen to though. So jump on YouTube if you want to listen to it for free. It starts off with a South African, which created a bit of an aversion for me because I'm like, do I have to listen to a South African accent the whole time? And then he did this, and he got diplomatic immunity, and but then it goes into other people actually speaking. So
like different people.
Yeah, it's a man and a woman.
Speaking.
Right,
okay. Because there's some
lovely voices.
There's some beautiful. There's we talk about the happiness, handing it over. There is this beautiful story in The Mastery of Love about this man and woman who are whole beings, and they meet each other and form this bond, and and then all of a sudden he hands. What's the image?
The stars.
It's the stars. Yeah, and she just dropped them, and they fell on the floor because being in charge of somebody else's happiness is far too much of a burden for someone to carry.
There's no such thing as love, and because there's this expectation that I have to make you happy, and it's just too much to bear. You can't be responsible for someone else's happiness.
No, it's too much. It's too much.
And it's funny when you read it again, you always get something different out of it, don't you?
Yeah.
And it's cool. So
it's like that analogy, a man never steps in the same river twice, because we're a different person when we read the book, and we pick up on different things.
Totes, man.
Totes. Let's wrap it up there, buddy. That was a long one.
It was. Thanks, listeners, for sticking with us. And we keep telling people to leave feedback or something on Spotify and that, but I've had a few people ask how to do it, so I don't know how they can leave us a star rating or review or whatever.
I only know on Apple Podcasts.
Right. Okay.
I don't listen to stuff on Spotify, even though we're on there. So I only know on Apple you just scroll to the bottom and do a 5-star review, which we're getting a few now, which is good. Spotify, I'll work it out and tell people next week.
All right. So you go into the Apple, the podcast app on your iPhone. And in there, you find the Woke Blokes podcast, and there you can leave a review. Yeah, you just scroll to the bottom. It'll have all the episodes, and then it's not in iTunes app. It's in the actual specific podcast app on your iPhone. Yeah. Cool. All right, man. Well, let's not beat around the bush. Let's get. Who have we got next week? We got
Gussie Warland from Gussie's coming on. Gotcha for Life is his non-for-profit that he's running, helping spreading awareness around mental health. Really looking forward to having a chat to him next week. Some of you may have heard of him. I actually used to watch his shows on Foxtel, like feels like fucking 10 years ago, when he used to go on the tours to the Ashes and sit with the Barmy Army. And he did one in India as well, and all that kind of jazz. And one of his best mates, who was very successful, for those not watching, I'm using air quotes because he had it all, killed himself. And this is what got Gus very, very interested in mental health and helping people not kill themselves.
I've done my homework. I've got a list of questions.
Oof, look out. I'll take a back seat.
I'm bringing my A game next week.
Look out, everyone. All right, everyone. Love you all.
Compelling listening. Peace, everyone.
Bye-bye.